John, there's another powerful concept that I think a lot about that I believe is important as we try to help people understand how to move from that thrive from survive to thrive. And that's about having a growth mindset, that mindset of being, believing that you can learn and grow and change and improve. How closely correlated to moving from survive to thrive is a growth mindset?
Yeah, it's clearly a part of the same constellation of ideas. A number of years ago, and I don't know if you even know this, Kelly, I decided that I wanted to study one executive in great depth, which means doing a biography. And I wanted to pick a great leader and see what I could learn from just studying a single person. And long story, how, but I ended up picking the guy who founded Panasonic, the Japanese company. And his name is Konosuke Matsushita. And it was a great project, and I enjoyed enormously writing the book. And what he was able to achieve is just almost hard to believe. It started with his company, but he went beyond his company in trying to help Japan as a nation think about itself and recover from World War II and grow. A lot of what we came to call, quote, Japanese management, unquote, in the 1970s was really invented by Matsushita's people at Panasonic in the 1950s. Nobody knows that. But anyway, one of the things that stands out so much as you look at his life is the whole notion of growth, both personal growth and organizational growth, and how much he put that at the center of his ideas and his ideas about what the purpose of his enterprise was, which was very broad, not narrow. And as a result, his people, often with very limited education, grew much, much more than the typical professional or technical or manager while he was building this firm. And he, although he had 4 years of formal education, and the number of problems that he ran into in his early life are just, they were horrendous. He kept growing and was still coming up with new things, seeing new opportunities, and helping mobilize people increasingly outside his company even to take advantage of those opportunities to help the nation, right up until he caught a cold and passed away at age 94. That people would be talking about this guy at age 90 and use words like, he's grown so much in his 80s is rather phenomenal. So growth mindset applied to individuals, applied to yourself, and applied to your organization, I think is a central component of all great leadership, and it's increasingly needed these days.
Absolutely, and to me, when you have that growth mindset, that supports, that thriving mentality, that thriving philosophy. So when you think, with a growth mindset, I can learn, I can change, I can grow, I can improve, and that leads you focusing on your purpose to an exciting, thriving kind of way of thinking. It's just a really good way to live versus the opposite, which so many people unfortunately do today. Thanks for sharing that
Absolutely.
with us. That was a story I had not heard. I wonder if Edwards Demings picked up part of his learnings from the gentleman you talked about.
I think so. I think you are correct. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's turn to another dual system that you talk a lot about. So you talk about using an agile approach to drive innovation, a more hierarchical environment to manage and control, and the need for balance between the two. Help people understand what that means.
Sure. The typical organization, business, or no matter what sector or industry or public as well as private, goes through a life cycle where they start off with very little hierarchy or processes or controls or metrics. They're organized in what we would call a loose network. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and multiple people provide a leadership role. And if they're successful, of course, they have to start scaling up some product or service. And in the process of doing that, they start adding what is essentially managerial processes and structures and the like, and a hierarchy that of the sort that we're all familiar with starts growing. And for a short period of time in most companies' histories, they have both. They have a network of entrepreneurial leadership and a well-managed, reliable, efficient hierarchy. And they're not two separate organizations. It's just one organization. And the people in the network have full-time jobs in the hierarchy, if you will. And it works beautifully. But what happens almost always is as they grow, the hierarchy has to, by definition, because it's scaling more and more of its products and services to more and more people, it has to grow. And after a while, those processes and the rules and the systems and the like start to kill off the entrepreneurial leadership type network. And you end up with a modern, in some cases, well-run bureaucracy. The problem with that is that that can be very efficient, very reliable, and very helpful in a relatively stable world. In a rapidly changing world, hierarchy is more of a keep reliability, keep efficiency, solve the problems, keep us on track, keep the trains on time. It's not invent a new form of transportation or invent a new form of rail transportation. You need that networked people kind of volunteering even to spend time on initiatives, that leadership spirit also now in large firms. And what we've learned over the last decade, since I helped co-found a consulting company that was designed to take my work and make it accessible to good leaders anywhere, is that you can take a mature organization that has maybe a century or more of history and systematically build within it this second system that's less hierarchy and plans and policies and processes, and is more of a network organization with people who are much more agile, opportunity focused, and the like, and have, as a result, the capacity to, in the short term, satisfy your commitments at a very high level of reliability and efficiency, and at the same time, be constantly adjusting in an agile way to this changing world, and taking advantage of the opportunities that world gives you. The number of large organizations today that have a really well-functioning dual system is very small. That can't continue. It's going to have to change. People will be forced to try to develop something like that. And the smart people, of course, will not be forced. They'll figure it out and do it before their competitors.
I'm 100% sure you're right. John, I attended a conference a few years ago. It was a fairly large conference, and there were a lot of CEOs from very large companies there, and then some small innovative companies. And one of the innovative company CEOs stood up and basically chastised us, trying to help us. But he just basically said, you large companies don't get it. I mean, you can't be innovative. You know, you build this organizational structure so that you can stamp out all this variation. And we call it innovation, you call it variation. So you stamp it out and it goes away. And of course, we've seen so many big companies, particularly in the last 20 years or so, that have gone away simply because they did stamp out innovation and the willingness to change. So that's a powerful, powerful point that I hope our audience will pay attention to. One of the things you cite in your book is you talk about studies that show the core force for making change successful and swift has more to do with hearts than heads, and experience and feelings than data and analysis. That probably sounds contrary to what a lot of people think. Could you explain that for our audience?
Sure. We did a big study maybe a decade ago or so, in which we looked at, close to 100 different strategic change efforts in the mostly private sector, but also some nonprofits and universities and the like too. And we got enough data on all 100 that I separated them into, I think, 4 or 5 groups. The most successful, then the second group, then the third, then fourth, and then the least successful. And when I tried to compare the most successful to the least successful, and the difference between the two was huge in terms of results, what was most striking is that in all cases, you had relatively smart people who tried to think things through carefully. In the more successful cases, they were better at that. But that wasn't the striking difference. The striking difference was in the most successful cases, you had people basically engaging people's or creating experiences or communication or interactions which engaged people's hearts and in the process affected their feelings, which in turn changed their behavior in a way that was more dramatic and more powerful and more successful. And again, to go back to my comment, and I don't mean this to be a cheap shot at my colleagues or myself who participated in management education, but so much of management education, not only MBA programs, but in companies, comes from economics and from finance and kind of forgets the human element. And the ultimate part of the human element is the emotions, and that's the heart. And in this study that I was referring to, of the 20 most successful cases, the number in which the people involved created experiences or interactions or engagements which really grabbed people's hearts, affected their feelings, changed their behavior, and then got results that way, was 20 out of 20. You don't find that kind of result in small N social science research. I mean, it was so dramatic. And yet, if you look at the way that most businesses are run, it's as if they don't believe it or have never been exposed to it, and that's not serving any of us well today.
That is so absolutely true based on my experience. I'll tell you, at Truist, we have a leadership model, and that model is about beliefs drive behaviors and behaviors drive results. Simple model, but powerful. It sounds a lot like your thoughts on the importance of reinforcing behaviors for long-term cultural change, and in particular, cultural integration during mergers and acquisitions. So when you think about behavior reinforcement, what have you found that works really well in terms of tying that heart change, that belief, and those behaviors together so we get consistent results?
Yeah. No, you're onto something very important there. The best definition of culture, actually, is shared beliefs and shared values about what's important, and norms of behavior that are passed along to new employees and to the next generation that come logically from those shared beliefs and values. And when we've studied cultural change, which becomes increasingly relevant these days, because as the world changes, certain aspects of a really good culture don't need to change, but other aspects do, as you'd expect. And in too many big bureaucracies, culture is an anchor more than it is an accelerant. And if you study people who successfully change their culture, they do it by actions that get results, that change mindsets, that draw attention because the results are better, and more people get in the game doing things in a new way, which change results, change mindsets. And it's not a matter of a few people on top dictating a piece of paper to the employee base. It's more a matter of a group of people finding through their actions that there are certain values and ways of behaving and beliefs that, if you follow them, drive behavior that produce better results, and it's all a self-reinforcing system. And too many efforts at trying to change cultures to make them more agile and more in touch with the reality of the times just don't operate that way. They're superficial, they're too short-term oriented, and they don't work. And as you said, or at least implied, Kelly, this kind of cultural integration becomes a huge issue in mergers. And the average M&A scoreboard is not a pretty sight. The people who have studied this seriously and don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, draw the conclusion that it is a very small number of mergers that get the value that was promised when the deal was made. And the single biggest thing they miss is the integration at the cultural level. And from what I have, what my banker friends tell me, you guys have approached your merger integration with more thoughtful intention about the importance of the cultural integration than about anybody they can think of. And you should be congratulated for that, because it's going to really pay off, I think, for you and your people and your communities and your customers.
Well, thank you, John. You're very kind. Bill Rogers, the former CEO of SunTrust and soon to be my successor, he and I agreed up front that these were two great companies, and economically and for a lot of other reasons. But the main reason we ought to bring them together was because our culture was aligned, our purpose, our mission, and our values. He and I personally deeply agreed on that. And that has driven us through this entire process. And so we simply believed and believe that if we get the culture right, the rest of it will take care of itself. Doesn't make it easy, but it will follow. And so we spend most of our time on that. So thanks for that acknowledgement. We appreciate that. So one of the issues that I want to kind of move towards as we wrap up, unfortunately, we're running out of time, is in organizations, John, especially in periods of great change, there seems to be a lot of stress, I think, coming out of a lot of, hanging around the survival mode too long. There seems to be a lack of focus on purpose, so people have a lack of sense of direction. And as a result, there seems to be a lack of happiness. Two of our core values at Truist are success and happiness. We simply believe that if you focus on success in the right way, that is to say, success as defined as achieving something worthwhile in life, not necessarily money and houses and cars, although that's fine, but achieving something that matters, makes the world better, then that helps bring a level of happiness. And we think that all really kind of centers around purpose. So as we wrap up, what words of wisdom would you share with our audience about kind of tying it all together? This moving away from unnecessary time in survival, moving into thriving, thinking about purpose, thinking about a sense of happiness. Wrap that all up as only you can for our audience, please, sir.
Well, I think, Kelly, that we all have a great opportunity in front of us to reduce that dysfunctional stress level that so many people are feeling these days, and to significantly increase the sense of meaning and purpose and excitement that too few people are feeling these days. To go back to the beginning of our discussion, the pandemic has alerted more people, I think, to the fact that the world can change on them pretty quickly and dramatically, and that's good. Now we need to move beyond that to start helping them develop the skills and the attitudes that are needed, that are very leadership oriented, to be able to thrive in that kind of world. And to, as a result, not only create a business that does well and grows, but creates lives that are better, that are more meaningful, that are less stressed, that can create the context for better and stronger families. I mean, the upside possibilities in this world that has so many challenges in it are just huge. And I certainly am dedicating my time to try to do everything I can to help smart leaders produce even more leadership among more people that produces those kinds of outcomes, personal and organizational. And from what I've seen over the last decade, what is possible goes so far beyond what the average person believes. And we've got to change that. We've got to actually start creating those better results because it's just the right thing to do. And in our world of 7 billion and in our country of over 300 million, we've certainly got a lot of people who need help. And the cynic and the pessimist would say there's not much we can do for them. And I would say the science says they're wrong. There's a lot we can do for them. And I think people like you and Bill, and some of your colleagues become priceless role models that we need more of all the time.
Well, thank you, John, for sharing that. So to my audience, I would say you've heard it today from the authority on leadership in dealing with change. Please read this book, Change. It'll really help you deal with the reality we deal with today, the dynamics of change. It'll help your company. It'll help yourself. It'll help your teammates and all of those around you. We live in very, very interesting times. There are plenty of challenges around, but working together, we can move from survive to thrive to happiness. Working together, we can overcome the obstacles of life. Working together, we can create a better world. Thank you all for joining John Kotter and myself today. I hope you have a blessed day.